Hi, everybody. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started so that way we can make sure there's enough time for some questions at the end. So I am Morgan Davis. I am the president here at the club. I'm really pleased to welcome you to today's discussion about Pride around the world. So as you see from our lineup of speakers, we really do have a very global panel today. We have Jennifer Bork from Ireland. We have Pablo from Mexico. We have Jerome here from Hong Kong Marriage Equality, and Shadaran from Thailand. So each of them will be able to share a little bit about their respective experiences with marriage equality in each of their own locations. Jerome, of course, will talk a little bit about what's going on here in Hong Kong as well. But I think what we're really going to see today is some diverse approaches to legalizing marriage equality around the world. We're going to see some different challenges that have come up, some different ways that governments have worked with local groups, with messaging to talk about these topics. So just to set the stage as well, I don't know how many of you know, but only 38 countries have fully legalized marriage equality in the world. There are other countries, of course, that have intermediary states for that, and some other statuses, but that's 38 that have fully legalized it. 2 of those are in Asia. Thailand is one of them, and Taiwan is the other. We then, of course, have other representatives from other legalized places that can talk about their respective regions and what is going on there too. So we'll just start by setting the stage with each of our participants telling a little bit about what's going on or what has gone on with marriage equality, and then we'll jump in with some questions. So Jenny, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks Morgan, and thanks to the FCC for hosting this really important discussion. So Ireland legalized same-sex marriage for the first time in 2015. So this year is our 10-year anniversary. So we're celebrating that all year by engaging in a program of celebrations in all our missions around the world and our communities. We were the first country in the world to legalize same-sex marriage by popular vote, which we see as a good thing, although we can talk a little bit later about how maybe that was problematic for some. It passed with 62% of the vote, which is really considerable. For anybody who knows anything about constitutional referenda, that's a big margin. And there was a 60.5% turnout, which was the highest in 20 years. And between then and now, there have been just under 6,000 registered same-sex marriages in Ireland. And so I think one of the interesting things about it, which is by no means unique, and I think maybe everyone here today will touch on this, but Ireland's journey very much is characterized by a very traditional, conservative society, conservative country, going on a journey to becoming much more socially progressive and eventually getting buy-in not only politically but from society to afford more equality to the LGBTQ society in our country. So that's a broad overview. I know we'll get into more details later.
Thank you. Yes, we'll definitely jump in with some specific questions for you. Pablo, can you set the stage on Mexico for us?
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to this very significant event. The long and winding road of Mexico to get to marriage equality. Well, as you know, Mexico is very conservative, Catholic, very entrenched Catholic country. But we have had, ever since our independence in 1821, we have had very progressive legislation in terms of social issues. For example, we abolished slavery in 1821. We've had abortion in our civil code since forever. We've had divorce forever. I mean, things like that are there since the 19th century. So Mexico is conservative and at the same time very progressive on social issues. Mexico is very contradictory. That's what I can say. It's a contradiction, absolutely. Mexico as well, you have to understand something. It's a federal state. It is not a centralized state. And marriage, in particular, falls into the purview of the states. It is not a federal issue. It is a local issue. Every state, the 32 states, have to approve and legislate their own code for marriage. So that makes it longer and more difficult to get it. The first step was taken in 2007, so that's not 15, 16 years, 18 years ago, almost 20 years ago, was taken in 2007. Funnily enough, again, contradiction in Mexico. The government, the federal government, was extremely conservative at the time, very Catholic, very right-wing, and they were not very happy with initiatives that were taken by the mayor of Mexico City, who belonged to another party, a very progressive and leftist party, who is now in power, by the way, the party. So in 2007, the legislature in Mexico City, and I stress Mexico City, was not the country, legalized first civil unions. And then in 2009, 2 years later, because of the activism of LGBT groups and because, of course, of the drive by the mayor of Mexico City, we became the first country in Latin America to recognize full same-sex marriage, 2009. Of course, the conservative government challenged that law. It was only applied to Mexico City, but it challenged the law, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And lo and behold, that in 2010, the Supreme Court upheld the Mexico City's 2009 law, and it did so by a 9-2 vote. I was amazed. I was in Mexico at the time. I never would have believed that the vote would have been so overwhelmingly in favor of the legislation. So it made it constitutional. And the president and his cabinet and the government it was a backfire from that challenge that they put to the court. Now, the ruling obliged states to recognize marriage performed elsewhere. It could not oblige them to perform marriage because of this federal structure. And some other states started moving along. And little by little, after some rulings, very significant rulings in 2015, 5 years after this, they say that the state laws that limited marriage to man and woman were unconstitutional. It was a very sweeping thing. And the states were thus encouraged or pressured, let me put it, encouraged is a nicer word, to change their legislation to eliminate from their constitution and from their civil code the fact that marriage had to be performed between a man and a woman. So little by little, it went forward. States started recognizing it, 2015. And the last state to recognize it was Tamaulipas in the north border with the US, who did it in October 2022. So not very long after the approval of the first law legalizing same-sex marriage. And it was really put in the Constitution in February 2023. The Constitution was amended, and now it is recognizing the same-sex marriage at the federal global level, and that, of course, cemented the nationwide right. The government in 2023 was a bit more progressive than the one in 2007 and 2009. So that's a long and winding road for Mexico. And I can say that I was very, very surprised at the turn of events. I was not at all expecting such a massive support, especially from the court. But it has become a very good issue for Mexico. I mean, visibility of LGBT groups, equal rights for everybody. So Mexico has been progressing, and Mexico is happy. And I don't see any dissent now, even in very staunch conservative groups. People are getting used to it, basically. So that would be my take. I can, of course, answer more questions and whatever. Thank you.
Yes, great, thank you. Shadaran, Thailand is one of the most recent places to have legalized same-sex marriage. Tell us a little bit about what's going on there.
So I have to share the same, I think, common elements with Mexico and Thailand. From outside, I think you think Thailand is a liberal country, but deep down, if you are in Thailand, we are a very conservative country. But we have embraced diversity. So in family units, most families still prefer the men and wife, right? But we are a tolerant society, so civil unions or same-sex partnership has been in Thailand for a long time. And just even in my ministry, we have accorded proper treatment for diplomatic people in Thailand. When they come to Thailand, we always invite their partners to ceremonies. And it has become an issue since, I think, 10 years ago when civil unions was discussed in the parliament. But it became one of the policy platforms during the last elections. And it has been the priority after the parliament was in session. So the bill was passed in 2024, and the act has been enforced since January this year. So it took us a long time, but actually the same-sex partnership has been for a long time in Thailand.
So Jerome, you of course have our Hong Kong perspective. Tell us a little bit about Hong Kong Marriage Equality, your organization that you co-founded, and what's been going on here.
So thanks, Morgan, and thanks for FCC for hosting the event. I think it's a very timely discussion for Hong Kong for obvious reasons. We were founded in 2019, but actually our story, I would start a little bit early on, actually in late 2018 in Bangkok, Thailand. I was at that time attending a regional conference on marriage equality. At that time, we knew Taiwan would become the first in Asia legalizing same-sex marriage. And a good discussion, a good debate, and then fast forward. In 2019, we thought it was time to set up a dedicated organization to drive the issue. At that time, we expected that the Court of Final Appeal would hand down a very favorable ruling involving a senior immigration officer in terms of taxation and spousal benefits. So that was obviously, in the end, that was a very good decision, and our organization was founded. We have been sort of trying to raise awareness. I would put it this way. Fundamentally, our campaign is to win hearts and minds. We believe, in any society, you have people who are supportive of our cause. There are people who are against our cause. But at the same time, we call it the movable middle, which this is the group of people we want to win their support. But I think quite encouraging is over the years what we have been seeing is strong support within Hong Kong society. Back in 2023, a survey done by 3 universities indicated that 60% of the population are supportive of equal marriage. I think that's a very clear majority. Now, for Hong Kong, obviously, we do not recognize same-sex marriage, but the Court of Final Appeal in 2023 handed down a decision. While holding that there isn't a constitutional right to same-sex marriage, the government has to recognize same-sex relationships via an alternative framework, and it gave the government 2 years to do the job. So a while ago, a framework was tabled and debated in the Legislative Council, which was unfortunately voted down. There are lots of lingering questions as to what would happen next. I think I would say the encouraging sign, quote unquote, is the government at least has indicated that it will see whether it could implement the court ruling via administrative means. I mean, it's not perfect, but I would say any protection is better than none, although we do have questions as how they could fulfill a core element in that decision, which is about legal recognition, in the absence of a specific legislation or legal framework. I think one last salient point I want to point out is, I mentioned earlier on, 60% of the population are supportive. Why the legislature, which supposedly I would say, in a somewhat ideal sense, that they should be reflective of popular sentiment. I think, first of all, it goes to the fact that in Hong Kong, we do have a very powerful and entrenched conservative bloc. These people are very influential in the upper echelon of our society, and quite often these people are Christian as well. So again, Christianity is not the major religion in the city. Why is that? I mean, again, it speaks to Hong Kong's colonial past. So the way forward is going to continue to be slow and windy, but I think the bright side is at least the government has acknowledged that something has to be done to protect these same-sex couples. There's strong support in society, so I would say it's a matter of time.
So it's interesting that every single one of you use the word conservative to describe the communities and the places that we're talking about. All of them have their own kind of cultural and religious ties in those senses. But the conversation often, as we hear, as we do in Hong Kong, is that we have a conservative community, they're not ready for this, we like traditional values, those sort of things. So maybe we can start with Jenny. Can you tell us a little bit about how that conversation changed or was shaped in Ireland? How do you deal with those conservative Catholic values when talking about marriage equality?
So the one-word answer is slowly and incrementally, for better or worse. So Ireland is only 100 years old as a sovereign state, and certainly in the 20th century, hugely marked by conservatism and deep, deep Catholic faith. And so there are a lot of incremental things that happened to bring Ireland to the point that it's at now. I would say one of the major things was our membership of the European Union, which kind of forced us into broadly becoming more socially progressive, certainly in terms of women's rights, which I think we made progress on before really LGBTQ plus rights. So Ireland, and just to give you a sense of how conservative Ireland was, so homosexuality was a crime until 1993. And divorce was illegal until 1995. Abortion was only legalized in 2018. So we're still quite comparatively conservative, and certainly were the whole way through the 20th century. I'd say one of the big things that helped society kind of move beyond that conservative Catholicism really was the decline of the Catholic Church. So in the 1990s, an absolute flood, a torrent of mass reports of sex abuse and child abuse from members of the clergy came out and were reported in Ireland. And the Catholic Church really lost all credibility, all trust. And so people stopped being in any way interested in anything that the Catholic Church had to say, certainly about relationships. And it's still considered to be on the decline today. And so that was a hugely important piece of the puzzle in terms of Irish people overcoming those cultural conservative challenges. But I'd also say there's a few other things. So the advances in technology and the speed of communications and the ability to share ideas globally. So people understanding that there's a different way to live, and there are people in the world who think differently, and there are societies that are more equal and more tolerant and inclusive, and the sky hasn't fallen, and so maybe we could do the same. And then, of course, for us, I would say another aspect is the global financial crash, which might sound a little bit of an odd one to include, but in tandem with the fact that Ireland had been through a period of economic success. So, capitalism and consumerism, and we were all buying things and having second homes and going on holidays, and then suddenly the global financial crash, everybody lost all of it. There were huge austerity measures put onto Irish people, and it made us all stop and think, well, if capitalism and consumerism has failed us in this moment, what do we stand for? What do we believe in? What do we stand for? What do we want? And so it actually was a moment of great reflection for Irish people. And that then led in 2012 into what we call the decade of centenaries, so 100 years since a 10-year period, marking a 10-year period 100 years previously, in which Ireland had struggled towards independence. And it was a very complex time in Irish history. And so the government created a program, a 10-year program of events and moments for Ireland and Irish people and Irish society to have a conversation about where have we come from, who are we now, how do we see the future, and facilitating those conversations. And again, coming together on the back of the global financial crash, that really created time for society to think about who we are, what we stand for, and what we want in the future. And of course, all of this is massively underpinned by the incredible work that the advocates and activists within the LGBTQ plus community were doing relentlessly since 2007 and beforehand, throughout the decades, to make people think about these issues and to bring it to the government and to bring it to society and to include their needs and their rights in that conversation as well. So they're just a few of the things I think culturally that shifted incrementally to allow society to come to a place where we were more ready to be able to accept it and to achieve buy-in to the whole idea.
And Pablo, in Mexico, of course, there's the Catholic tradition there as well. But as you mentioned, it's been a bit different. You had legalized abortion and divorce well before a place like Ireland did. So how did that still play out with the conservative values in Mexico when you were discussing marriage equality?
Thank you. Well, you have to remember every time you talk about Mexico, that Mexico is the only country in the world that has an X in its name. And X also goes in oxymoron. So it is a contradiction. Mexico is very contradictory in many, many things. The Catholic Church, of course, is powerful. It has always been powerful, but it has been stripped of power little by little. Ever since the 19th century, 1860, all the clergy, all the church property was confiscated, etc. So 1860, I mean, we're talking for a very long time ago. So the church has been losing its great power, except in certain circles. And this is a secular state. The separation of church and state in Mexico dates from the early 19th century too. So that's a way to defeat that. We're a secular state. You cannot impose your rulings on us, and that's it. So people understood that all the talk about protecting the family, protecting the children, destroying the fabric of our society, were not going to happen, and they didn't happen. An argument that I've heard to my friend Miguel over there. Miguel, where are you? I don't know. Over there. Miguel has an excellent argument, the Consul General of Spain. He says, and I think he's perfectly right, that it doesn't destroy the fabric of society. Parents want their children to be happy. That is the basic reason to have children. Why you don't want unhappy children in the world. So how can I make my child happy if my child has a different idea of happiness? So let's go with that. And I think it's a very, very valid argument that Miguel puts forward there. So that's the way it was overcome. And of course, the very progressive Supreme Court, the progressive drive of the mayor of Mexico City and people following him, and then of course the lobby, the LGBT lobby, that was very successful. So that's the way things were overcome in this oxymoronic country, with an X.
Thank you for that. Shadaran, when it comes to Thailand then, what are we talking about with the conservative values? Is that religious ties? Is it cultural ties? What's leading those?
So I think the majority of Thai people are Buddhist, and I think more than 90%. And for Buddhists, there's one aspect that in the past we believe that son, when they get ordained into a monkhood, the parents will go to nirvana or heaven. But it's changed with the economic development, and now the family becomes smaller, and most couples decide not to have any children. So the grandparents, they cannot expect the children or to have any children. So now I think it's more acceptable for couples not to have children. So it has changed, but I think traditionally parents still expect their son or daughters, when they get married, they should have a son at least, or the daughter. So that's changed.
And so with that then, are some of the values in Thai society changing? Are you seeing a shift away from some of those?
It's more acceptable because parents cannot force their children to marry or to have sons or children nowadays.
And Jerome, what do you see as some of the challenges we face in Hong Kong when it comes to these conservative values and the conversation here?
I think the most difficult part is, when these conservatives, they speak out against the issue, they tend to like to cite as something that is against the traditional values. But then we need to start asking what traditional values are they talking about, specifically on the issue of marriage. I mean, for those who may not know, in Hong Kong, last time the city saw a major revamp of the legislation, it was back in 1970. Well, basically, up until then, Hong Kong recognized marriages conducted under Chinese customary law. What does that mean? That means that we could have one husband, one wife, and with multiple concubines. So definitely it's not the kind of monogamy that we are talking about. But at that time, the government amended the legislation, and of course, that took effect in 1971, which that is the current definition of marriage that we have, and it does make reference to Christian marriages or the equivalent thereof. So you can see that kind of influence of Christianity in a sense. And the fact of the matter is we do have lots of good Christians around the city, especially many of them are high-level officials. So although it's hard to speculate as to what extent their personal belief influenced their decision-making process, but I guess it's not unfair to question that aspect. Again, you're talking about traditions. Obviously, the argument doesn't hold any water at all. And they could never really counter-argue about this one. Instead, they sidestep and then they talk about other things, about children or whatever. And then we started talking, okay, you look around the world, obviously, I say the sky hasn't fallen down. If we talk about how equal marriage would damage the fabric of society or hurt the institution of marriage, that's not the case according to the experiences of all these 38 countries and territories. So I could only say that it has something to do with the fact that somehow, in some way, religion still influence the thought process in a way, and that's something it's not easy to, I would say, to tackle in the sense of, especially Hong Kong, it's a secular society, but they're quite smart in not using religion as an argument. So it's quite difficult to have an honest debate as to what they are really against. But I would say I think the encouraging sign is the younger generation. It's very supportive. And I think I would like to cite one example. Back in 2019, we did a focus group research precisely asking people why they were not ready to support equal marriage. So I remember we engaged 3 broad demographic groups, people in the early 20s to 30s, and then 30s to 40s, and then the retirees, divided equally between males and females. In fact, religion did not come out as a strong reason why they were against same-sex marriage. I would say one thing that came out quite strongly is some of them, the younger ones, were quite worried about competing for social resources, whether there will be longer waiting lines when it comes to waiting lists in public hospital or public housing. The other thing would be, I would say, parents in their 30s and 40s, because they weren't quite sure if we have same-sex marriage, how would they teach their children? Is it like how they I remember even one story, they said, look, what if in the future I go to a school like with some functions or whatever, if I'm going to see same-sex rainbow families, how I'm going to address, is it I call them father and father, mother and mother, or they have all these kind of fears and worries. But when we sort of press further, asking, look, what if your child came out as gay or whatever, they would say, look, maybe I need to make sure that whether my child knows what he or she is talking about. But if they really understand what they're talking about, then I said I need to support them because they love their kids. So I think there's the literature theme in the sense of they want their kids to be happy. So I think people are capable of change, but it's just quite unfortunate whenever we have a discussion of the issue in society, that powerful but vocal voice, they tends to get the most attention, and then people would start thinking, does that represent the voice of the majority? My answer is no, absolutely not.
So then what does that mean for you as an organization when you're communicating and trying to, as you said, change the hearts and minds in Hong Kong?
We have been trying to, I guess we have produced numerous videos featuring couples and to tell them why they feel it's so important to have their relationships recognized. And I think so far the engagement that we have seen, they are quite positive. The people that I talk to, I think most are quite okay with the idea of recognizing same-sex relationships. And some of them, I think back in those days, I remember we did 2 focus group research. People even told us that, they knew what's been happening around the world. Possibly this is something that will sooner or later come to Hong Kong. So they knew it would happen. So I think it's a matter of time. But I think right now is whether we have the kind of I would say, atmosphere that would, I would say that enable people that could come forward to share their voice. I think one thing that I would say, not in the most positive way, but at the same time, back in the summer when the government started proposing this framework, which was a very modest proposal, I think one common point shared by both opponents and supporters was the process was too rushed. There wasn't enough time for stakeholders to have a debate or discussion. So I would say to go forward, we need to have time. I think with time and with leadership, that I'm sure we can get something done. I'm quite sure Hong Kong is capable of seeing progress.
Yes, it sounds like from our other experiences up here, time is a big factor as we saw it drawn out in many ways. Maybe, Jenny, can you tell us a little bit more about the messaging that came across? You talked about some of the advocates in Ireland and how they communicated that. How was the conversation shaped?
Yeah, so one of what Jerome was saying about time, so the conversation happened over quite a long period of time in Ireland. It kind of started around 2007. There was a court case taken against the revenue commissioners by an Irish woman and an American woman who had married in Canada. And that got quite a lot of attention. So they lost the case, but they got a lot of political backing, and there was a whole movement created around it, which led to political support, which led to what we now call citizens' assemblies, but then it was called a constitutional convention. But basically, it's getting a couple of hundred people, Irish people, in a room together over the course of a few weekends to discuss an issue with a view to potentially putting it to a referendum for a constitutional change. And so that was really a huge turning point and a really important part of the messaging. So it was the group that's chosen was it's a representative sample of the population of Ireland. And they talk to people who are within the LGBTQ plus community, they talk to medical experts, they talk to anybody who has works in that space, anybody who has a vested interest, they talk to people whose children were gay. There was a whole program of listening and learning and discussing, and it's a deliberative democratic process, and so people break off into small groups and discuss, and then they make a recommendation and report at the end, and it goes to the government. And I think it was 79% of people recommended that it be put up on the ballot as a referendum, and so that was a really, really important part of the messaging. So before it even went on a ballot, everybody knew that this constitutional convention had already 79% of people were in favor of it going to a vote, and the messaging around it was very positive. And so that was the kind of, as the campaign was going along. But then I suppose in terms of the messaging on the way towards the vote and the few months in advance, which is where it really kind of ramped up, it was simple and very straightforward and focused very much on really the simple, universal, basic concept of fairness. So the slogan was just yes, equality. And the idea was that you, first of all, again, to Jerome's point, you target young people. That was a huge target. It was an extremely strategic campaign. So targeting young people, keeping your message simple, and then again, what Jerome was saying, hearts and minds. So it's about personal stories, it's about keeping it simple, and it's about appealing to people's universal feelings towards fairness and equality across the board. In Ireland then, what we also did was that, or what the campaign managers also did was then they got some very conservative figures on board. So the former President of Ireland, Mary McAleese, who was hugely loved and respected, and who was also a Catholic, and a very committed Catholic, but a progressive Catholic, and gets in trouble with the church because she's so progressive, but still is extremely committed to the Catholic Church. So she was a great voice for them, and also a senior political leader called Tom Curran, who was massively respected within one of our more conservative political parties, Fine Gael at the time. So trying to get those voices on board, and they had been engaging with them for a long period of time beforehand. So those kind of messages were massively important for Ireland. And then it was things like just door knocking, social media. There was a huge home to vote campaign. So in Ireland, you can't vote from abroad. You can only vote on Irish soil. And so people flew home in their thousands. We've no definite numbers, but the estimate is that they flew home in their thousands to actually vote on Irish soil. And if I can just go through some of the lessons learned after the campaign were, again, some of these overlap with what Jerome has already said, but laying the public groundwork carefully before pursuing a major policy change, making use of research to better understand the values and beliefs of people whose support must be gained, bringing in people with specific skills who may come from outside of the community, finding a simple message that will resonate, putting human stories at the center, and authentic local voices must be heard. And they were some of the lessons that were learned specifically by the campaign that led to their success.
I think some of the overlapping points with what you've said comes down to economics. And this is something that we've heard a lot in the Hong Kong campaign as well, is what does this mean for us as an international hub? How are we bringing in talent? What are the benefits in that regard? I know with Thailand, it's become a hub for LGBT tourism, and you guys have done a lot of advocacy on the international stage. How has that played into your message?
I think it has started when we have done the series love story between men and women. It's very popular. It's called Series Y. I don't know whether you heard about that. It's popular in Hong Kong, also in South Korea, in Asia. And I think the government has also promoted Thailand as the LGBTQ hub. They call it the pink economy. So we have organized what they call Born This Way. It's an event during the Pride Festival, Pride Month in May to June. And then we also have several events throughout the year. They call like Galaxy of Love or Own Your Pride. So we have all sorts of events for the LGBTQ people to come to Thailand. And it generates a lot of incomes to Thailand also. We expect this year we would have around 4 million from the LGBTQ community visiting Thailand. So it's a huge money.
Great. And Jerome, how do you see that playing into Hong Kong then? Is that something that you see is helpful in your advocacy?
I would say the economic case, it's very persuasive and powerful. I think that was a main theme in driving our work to help people understand why we need to have marriage equality. Of course, it's important in itself because it's about human dignity, it's about respect and all these things. But Hong Kong being an international financial hub, there's a very strong argument to be made when it comes to attracting global talent. I mean, we're not talking about traditional financial services. We are talking about fintech startups as well. Even tourism, which is a major pillar of the city's economy. I think we have seen, let's give you some numbers. For example, according to Boston Consulting Group, they estimated that marriage equality in the States have contributed roughly $25 billion over the past 10 years. And when it comes to the size of the global pink or rainbow economy, I think it's valued at roughly $4.7 trillion. It's a huge amount. And so I think the question has to be asked. I mean, economy is important, obviously. So if we want to bring talent in, you want to attract tourism, then I think we need to make our city welcoming. I mean, that's very common sense. It's not something, I mean, anybody can understand that. And in order to do so, I think there's a need to making sure that our policies are inclusive. I'll just tell you a little bit of personal story. So last year, actually, I traveled to Bangkok twice for work. I remember the first trip I took was in late October, if I remember correctly. So as soon as I approached the immigration counter, I noticed something very different. Almost, I mean, all immigration counters at the airport, they had these sort of rainbow stickers on it to tell visitors that you know, the country is very welcoming. I think, yes, it's a nice gesture. It's a very small gesture, but I think that says a lot of how the government positions a country or city when it comes to sending a very warm and welcoming message. And I did ask my friend in Thailand, I said, hey, what's going on? Is it because the Thai government is obviously trying to position Thailand as the preeminent hub welcoming LGBT tourists or retirees? When we talk about retirees, we are talking about all kinds of economic values those people can bring. So again, the economic case is important, and at least I am, say, cautiously optimistic that people are now starting realizing that, hey, if we don't do this, we are actually losing out in this global competition after the pink economy. And this economic angle was actually brought up by some lawmakers in the electoral debate. I think that's an encouraging sign. So I would say going forward, obviously, it's not going to be a smooth sailing. There will be all these twists and turns, not least the global climate is a bit hostile when it comes to LGBT inclusion. But I would say with careful navigation, hopefully, if we see more progress in Asia, then certainly I would say people in Hong Kong, even policy lawmakers will soon waking up and say, look, we need to do something because it goes to the core questions to how Hong Kong position itself in the global, not only in the region, but globally.
Great. Well, I have a couple more questions, but I want to make sure we have time for the audience as well. I see a question over here already, and then over here next. Thank you.
Question for Jerome, but also maybe for Chasaran. Often when you talk to kind of critics of marriage equality in Asia and Hong Kong and in China and elsewhere, they'll kind of present it as if it's this Western idea that LGBTQ rights are some kind of Western import. Can you talk a bit about kind of how you make the case for this as an Asian idea, as you know, for Asian LGBT people, that this is something that we should promote and this is not some kind of foreign thing we're imposing on these societies?
Well, I would say it goes down to about human dignity and respect. I mean, these two values are universal. There's nothing Western or Chinese or Asian in that regard. And I think for Asia, I would say the good two examples are both Thailand and Taiwan. Of course, Taiwan, and Hong Kong both share the same cultural roots. So, I mean, it's something that people find it very easy to understand. And I think most people don't see this as a competition between Western and Chinese values. I think people find that argument it's a bit of nonsensical, I would say. But of course, it's always a very good argument, usually deployed by certain people to sidetrack the issue. But I would say I encourage people to look globally as to, we talk about values. What values are we talking about, first of all? And secondly, I would even bring up the case of Cuba, which legalized same-sex marriage back in 2022, if I remember correctly. I said, look, what kind of Cuba country it is? So think for yourselves. And I think people are capable of thinking. And again, drawing from a very personal example, I remember years ago, I had this little conversation with a good friend. At that time, she was my ex-colleague. So one day she came to me and said, look, she was quite unhappy that at that time, I was living in Canada at that time, and she was quite unhappy because first of all, she called herself a progressive Christian. And she said, look, it's okay, whatever you call it, but just don't call marriage because marriage is so sacred to her. So to make a long story short, I said, look, we don't need to have an argument. I mean, friendship is more important than anything else. But I try to explain to her why marriage is important, because it's about equality. It's never good to have a separate system because separate is never equal anyway. But I said, look, we don't have to agree with me. We can agree to disagree. A few years later on, she came to me and she told me, oh, I'm all good right now with marriage equality. Because by that time, she saw firsthand that same-sex marriage doesn't cost anything, really. So I think once people realize that is no big deal, really. And really, when it comes to marriage as a kind of a conservative institution, isn't that good that to have more people embracing that institution? So once people have the room to think for themselves, I think most people would come to their sense and look, this is the right thing to do. But it does take time.
Yes, question over here.
I have a question for the Thai and the Mexican representatives today. With Ireland, like Australia, am I correct fact-checking, it's a constitutional change. So it's not really movable unless you go back to having another referendum or a plebiscite. And in Mexico, you described it as all of the states arriving at a federal law, piece of legislation. I'm not quite sure about the Thai, but I keep thinking back on America and how the Supreme Court has undone Roe versus Wade. How resilient, how sustainable is the legislation that it can't be undone at the whim of a change of political tide or something? I'm curious to know.
Well, of course, legislation is always changeable. And you can always go back to your previous, provisions. The Constitution in Mexico is very difficult to change, like the American Constitution is very difficult to amend.
So now that this is incorporated into the Mexican Constitution, it is there to stay, because to change it takes a very long, convoluted process. Again, DX. It takes a very long, convoluted process. You need majority, two-thirds majority in both chambers, two-thirds majority of the state legislators, etc., to change any provision in the Constitution. So I don't think it's going to go anywhere in Mexico for the time being. It's not a simple legislation that you can change by a majority vote in Congress.
So by federalizing all the states' agreement, by federalizing the states' agreement, it's become a constitutional
Yes, it is
thing.
constitutional now.
Okay. And what about Thailand?
For Thailand, is the act level, so it can be undone. But now I think it can never be undone. It passed both House of Representatives and the Senate.
Question right here.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Lee Williamson. I work at the South China Morning Post. I'm also a correspondent governor here at the club. I want to pick up on two things that Jerome said to ask the question to the consuls general on the panel. Jerome, you mentioned that conservative factions often will use the excuse of marriage equality is bad for families, is bad for the fabric of society. The consuls general spent quite a lot of time talking about their long journey towards marriage equality. I'm wondering if perhaps they can share some of their experience, both statistical and anecdotal. What happened afterwards? What happened afterwards to the units of family in your countries? What happened to societies? What happened, to Jerome's other point, to the economic benefits? Can you share some stories after these journeys? What were the consequences? What were the positive benefits for your countries? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, as Jerome was saying, like, you know, kind of, the sky didn't fall. Like, nothing bad happened. Everything just kind of continued as normal, but it was better for the LGBTQ community. And also to echo what Jerome was saying about kind of universal human rights and equality being a non-negotiable in that. And that when you can't have equality without the LGBTQ community involved in that. And so you can't have universal human rights without having the equality of the LGBTQ community, which everyone is entitled to. So I think it was more of a kind of a fulfillment of that. I was looking at birth rates, right? And birth rates have declined, but they've declined since 2008, since the global financial crash. So in terms of birth rates declining and the family and all this kind of thing, that's clearly for economic reasons. Absolutely nothing to do with marriage equality. There was no, didn't go off a cliff edge. Nothing happened after 2015. It's stayed the same. There are different things going on in society, but there's absolutely no evidence that it's anything to do with marriage equality. And then anecdotally, it took one thing off the table, I would say. It's one thing that the community don't have to think about anymore, so it takes that stress. It's a relief. But there are still lots of other things that the community are fighting for. There are more things that are issues. But it certainly hasn't eroded traditional family values. It hasn't made any straight people's marriages worse, put it that way, do you know? So I haven't heard of anyone, I haven't heard of anything, I haven't heard any dissenting voices, only positive things and only very joyful weddings and celebrations of gay marriage, that's all.
Yeah, well, I agree with Jennifer about this. In Mexico, it actually, none of the predictions that were brandished like ghosts, like scarecrows, and this will diminish the fabric of society, this will destroy the family values, this will be horrible for children to be adopted by a gay couple, etc., etc., etc. None of that has come true. And people have started to realize that nothing changed, actually. It only provided stability to a certain sector of the population that didn't have any stability. And it also helped children in families, children that were abandoned or children that needed adoption, to be in stable families. So all the predictions didn't come true. None of the predictions came true, actually. It's very, very simple, in very simple terms. Now, society has changed, society has evolved, and I can see that in younger generations in Mexico. They see this as very normal. Nobody ever questions these things anymore. People my age do, but people that are 20 years old or 18 years old or even younger, they don't question those things anymore.
They see it as a normal part of their life. So to me, it's a very positive effect in society. No negative, but all positive.
Yeah. For Thailand, as I said, that they have been together for a long time. It's just not this year. So we just give them the long deserved rights. So now they get their legal rights. They can have their inheritance. They can, when they go to hospital, they can give approval for any operation. It's just their rights that we give them. So it's only benefit. There is no negative issue.
There's a question in the back corner, and then one up here.
Thank you. I'm Emily Lau of the Democratic Party, and my party supports LGBTIQ rights. But of course, we have to disband at the end of the year. But our members will continue to support it. And it is a pity that Hong Kong, as an international city, so vibrant, and who used to be so free, that we cannot have a big movement to support it. Why? Because there are no more demonstrations or no more big marches to support gay rights. So given our difficulties, how do you think we can get things to move forward? Because we all love Hong Kong, and Hong Kong, we wish the economy to boom, and the pink economy, of course, is very good, but they are thinking they're racking their brains. But nobody mentioned that, although you say someone said it in LegCo. But none of our policy secretary or the chief executive mentioned this, although this is a pot of gold. So how can we move forward, given the fact that whatever you say that they disagree with may be against national security or even is soft resistance? So even the LGBT community, they are quite quiet. I can see they go to court, but they're very quiet. And of course, there are no marches, no demonstrations, no petition. This is not Hong Kong. So we want to attract talents and business, of course, but we want our people to be free. And you're right in saying that the majority of Hong Kong people support people having those rights. But how can we get their voices to be heard without getting arrested, of course?
Jerome, what do you do?
Good question. I would say, you know, one thing is I think it's important to encourage, first of all, influence your friends. You know, there are lots of people who may be supportive, but perhaps they decided to stay quiet. So it's a time to speak up in terms of you could influence people around, say that this is an issue we need to support because of all these good reasons, and then write to the government, write to lawmakers and tell them, because they need to be heard. Right now, I think the unfortunate fact is those powerful naysayers, they are very vocal, they are very organized and powerful and well resourced, and something that I have to admit that the committee as a whole is being put at a disadvantage when it comes to mobilizing supporters. But I think I try to, you know, always look at the optimistic side of things in terms of now that the issue is front and center. The government sooner or later will need to tell us how they will try to proceed the matter forward, because obviously there's still the constitutional obligation to fulfill that particular court decision. So I think this issue, we need to keep the issue warm, and I think one thing to do is, you know, tell your friends, you know, allies is important when it comes to the movement. You know, encouraging them, look, be vocal a little bit. Vocal. We doesn't need to do things that would be perceived as against the law, but it could just write to lawmakers, write to policymakers, and what I'm confident is hopefully we might see some new numbers coming in. I know there are groups doing all kinds of research. Hopefully we'll see some more local, relevant to the local numbers, relevant to the local context. Once we have those numbers, then we can use those numbers and really amplify the economic case, and then hopefully that you know we'll see a bit of a leadership from our government in the not so distant future.
Can I share one thing? I think Hong Kong is more advanced than Thailand in one aspect, and we have to work on to catch up. In Hong Kong, as I mentioned to you, the transgender people, when in Thailand, even though they have gone through operation, they still have their ID on their original sex. So we are trying this year when we launch new passport project, we will just first omit the title and we will adopt the IKO. In the sex, male, female, we will add X. So enough for people choose to be neutral. So, but in Hong Kong, if once you have sex change, they can register their marriage. So that's another aspect that I think Hong Kong is more advanced.
That's a great point. I think we have time for one last question, so we had one right up here.
Hi, Charles Reeves, Consul General for Canada. Just want to echo the sort of conservatism that we were talking about. The Canadian government was a conservative Canadian government that introduced same-sex marriage 20 years ago. As a gay married man, I want to just talk about what Jerome was talking about, the importance of the dignity and respect, to make that sort of acknowledgement to people that what you're doing is different from others is really important to people personally. Sorry, I'm a bit emotional. But just listening to Jenny and Pablo and Chattaran talk about what happened in their countries and what a difficult journey it is, it's really important for people to recognize how appreciated it is by the gay and lesbian community to be recognized with the dignity and respect that every human being should be allocated. So I just want to say thank you so much. It was a really touching, moving discourse on how difficult it is, but how important it is for people like me to hear those journeys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a great way for us to end this. Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming, for your questions and your participation. We, of course, encourage you to continue the conversation. I'm sure our panelists will be happy to speak with you as well. Thank you again for coming to the FCC, and we hope to see you again soon.